All right, welcome to the Explainer. Let's talk about the U.S. federal debt. I mean, the number is so huge, it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around, right? Well, today, we're going to try and make sense of it all. The good, the bad, and yeah, the ugly, using some great data from a recent Wall Street report.
Okay, let's just dive right into the single most important question you can ask. So think about it this way. For every single tax dollar the government collects, how much of it is already spent before it even hits the bank? I'm talking about the money that just goes to paying interest on past borrowing.
To figure that out, we look at a really important number called the interest to tax receipts ratio. It's a pretty simple idea, but it's a super powerful indicator of a country's financial health. You know, the higher that number gets, the less money is left over for, well, everything else. We're talking defense, roads, you name it.
And if you want to see just how bad this can get, you've got to look back in time. Back in the early 80s, things got so crazy that over half, more than 50 cents of every single tax dollar was just going to pay interest. It was a total crisis, and that number, well, it's a pretty scary benchmark.
But, and this is where the story gets a little weird, the latest numbers actually show something surprising. A little bit of good news, believe it or not.
Okay, so in the third quarter, the ratio was 33.2%. That means about 33 cents of every tax dollar went to paying interest. Now, don't get me wrong, that is still a huge chunk of money. But here's the kicker. It's actually the fourth quarter in a row that this number has dropped. So what gives?
Right, so here's the key. The ratio got better, but not because the government spent less on interest. It's because tax revenues went through the roof. Tax collections jumped almost 18% compared to last year. That growth was way faster than the increase in interest payments. It's kind of like a race, right? And for the moment, tax income is actually winning. So where did all this cash come from? Well, a big part of it is just a growing economy, which pushed total tax receipts to a record $902 billion in Q3. And a pretty hefty piece of that, we're talking $87 billion, came from new tariffs. So those are now a really big part of the government's income.
Okay, so that's the income side. Let's flip over and look at the other side of the equation, the interest payments themselves, because they also helped create this, let's call it a temporary calm.
This is actually pretty fascinating. If you look at the average interest rate the government pays on all of its debt, it's been on a wild ride. It hit a record low back in early 2022, and then, bam, it shot up as the Fed started hiking rates. But lately, it's kind of stalled out. It's stabilized right around 3.35%. So the question is, why did it suddenly hit the brakes? The answer is all about the mix of the debt the government has. The original analysis had a great analogy for this. Think of it like the story of the tortoise and the hare. Short-term debt, stuff like T-bills, that's the hare. It has to get rolled over all the time, so it reacts super fast to the Fed's higher rates. But the long-term bonds, those are the tortoise. A lot of those were sold years ago when rates were crazy low, and they're still locked in. So that massive pile of slow-moving debt is really dragging down the average rate, which, for now, is giving the government a bit of breathing room. Okay, but let's not get too comfortable. All of this short-term relief is happening against a backdrop that is, well, it's pretty terrifying, and that's the sheer mind-boggling size of the debt mountain itself.
Right now, the total U.S. national debt is sitting at 121% of GDP. To put that in perspective, it means the government owes more money than the value of every single thing produced and every service provided in the entire U.S. for a whole year. When a country's debt is that much bigger than its economy, it sends a really worrying signal to the rest of the world. It can make future borrowing more expensive and really limit your options when the next crisis hits.
And we're not just talking high. The source for our explainer calls this nosebleed territory. And that's a perfect description. We are at a level we have literally never seen before, except during something like a massive world war.
And if you look at this timeline, you see a really disturbing pattern. You know, before the year 2000, this ratio was chilling out below 40%. But then, starting with the recession in the early 2000s, it's been the same story over and over. A crisis hits, the debt explodes, and this is the important part. It never goes back down. The 2008 financial crisis and then the pandemic in 2020, they just sent this thing straight up.
So that's the big question, right? When you have a debt mountain this big, what's the game plan? How on earth do you deal with it?
Okay, first things first. An outright default where the U.S. just says, sorry, we're not paying you back, that's probably not in the cards. Why? Because the debt is in U.S. dollars, and the U.S. government is the one that, well, creates U.S. dollars. So theoretically, they can always make more money to pay the bills.
But hold on, that whole printing money thing is definitely not a free lunch. Especially when inflation is already a concern. Just firing up the money printers to pay off old debt is a recipe for disaster. It could make prices spiral completely out of control. What you'd get is basically a default by inflation. It would just destroy people's savings and make everyone poorer. So, knowing that, what's the government's actual strategy? Well, the source we're looking at calls it the official wish list, and it's a real balancing act. Step 1, try to trim the annual deficits, just a little. Step 2, hope like heck that the economy keeps growing. Step 3, let inflation run a little hot, say 3 to 5%, to kind of shrink the real value of the debt over time. And step 4, and this is the big one, cross your fingers and pray that another major crisis doesn't come along and blow the whole thing up.
And that, of course, leaves us with the final, truly trillion-dollar question. Is this wish list plan actually going to work? Can the U.S. economy really, truly grow faster than its debt? Or is that pattern we've been seeing for the last quarter century just going to repeat itself? Is the next crisis lurking just around the corner, ready to push this debt mountain past the point of no return?